Our oldest son, Andrew, turned 32 this month. It's hard to believe that it's been 32 years that I've walked the planet with that guy. You know, my life hasn't been the same since, well, actually, since I knew that Joy was pregnant, and I began to anticipate what it would be like to have a child. Didn't know if it would be a son or a daughter at that time, but something happened really early on in his infancy that that crystallized for me what it was going to be like to be a parent, and more than that, eventually showed me what it's really like to be a child of God, to be a part of God's creation. So let me tell you. It was really simple. I was basically lying down to take a nap with Andrew, under the cover of helping him get to sleep, helping myself get to sleep too. And lying there next to him in a bed, I was struck with the realization that from that moment forward, my life was so intricately and intimately interwoven with, braided into his, that my well-being, my happiness, the meaning of my life could not be separated from how things were going with him. His well-being and my well-being would never be two separate things. I was in that kind of precognitive way, where I wasn't exactly thinking it only. I was really feeling it down in my bones, right? That, wow, I'm forever connected to this guy in more than just thought or imagination. My very being is woven into his in this profound way. Well, over time, I came to realize that that's what it is to be a part of God's creation. Let me put it this way. Think about the creation not as an assembly, say, like a bag full of marbles, okay? It's not like a bag full of marbles where there are all these individual things that might go crashing into one another or heaped on top of one another, or they're like Legos that can be put together and pulled apart. The creation, from the beginning and to its very end, is a web. Everything is connected to everything else. What a web is it's a web of relationships. You can't just pull one of the strands out and still have a web. I mean, if you try to separate out the strands, you just destroy the web. God brought into being an intricate network of relationships. Who we are is always a matter of relationship. First and foremost, of course, to the web maker, but we relate to one another in this web and relate to God when we relate to one another. That's what Jesus was getting at when he said, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me." Folks, it's all about relationship. It's all about relationship. Our connection with God and our connection with God's beloved creatures, God's beloved children, can't just be separated out. Jesus is always about leading us toward a deeper and a deeper and a deeper awareness of solidarity with the rest of God's beloved. Jesus comes at that a whole lot of different ways. Jesus, for example, gave us the summary of the law. Love God with all your mind and your soul. Every particle of your being, right? And then love your neighbor as yourself. And by that, at least I understand him to be saying, love your neighbor as part of who you really are. That you share a connection that's so deep that you can't separate each other's well-being, right? Your well-being and my well-being, they can't be pulled apart. They're connected forever. That's what it means to recognize that. So that's one way that Jesus talks about the deep spiritual calling to solidarity, to unity, right, that we prayed about in the collect today. He also said, you give somebody a cup of cold water on a hot day, you're slaking my thirst. Jesus said, whatever you do to the least of these, right? If you clothe the naked, if you shelter the homeless, if you feed the hungry, why, guess what? You're clothing, sheltering, and feeding me. Jesus is all in about solidarity. Jesus today says, when you welcome one of my disciples, one of my friends, you welcome me, and when you welcome me, you welcome God. Our lives are all about welcoming God into them. You see, a lot of us, I suspect, think that, we're calling out to God to get God to show up, to be present, to do something for us, I guess, right? What Richard Rohr likes to point out repeatedly, and many like him, is this. You don't have to talk God into showing up. God's here, now, always. God is always present. Our problem is a lack of awareness. And I really shouldn't even put it that way. Our growing edge is deepening our awareness of the God who is always present. Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. In other words, Jesus is the very message that, look, God's already shown up. Here's where God is, right here with you. Now, welcome the God. Welcome the God who loves you enough to show up wherever you are, no matter how gloriously beautiful it is, and no matter how messy it is.